Welcome to the Truth and Liberty Show, where trusted leaders bring biblical insights to important issues to help you stand for truth and effect godly change in our nation and in our world.
Welcome, everybody, to the Truth and Liberty Show. I'm Richard Harris, your host, and it is so good to have you joining us today. I have an amazing program, an extremely informative program, and hopefully a little bit jarring for you today, lined up with my special guest, John Guandolo. Before we get into today's show, though, I wanted to mention that we do have a free gift for you today. If you haven't yet picked up your copy of What is a Biblical Worldview, this little booklet by Andrew Wommack, you need to do so. Just go to our website at truthandlibertygtn.com and you can sign up and get your free copy today. Do you know only a very small portion of our population in America has a biblical worldview anymore? According to George Barna's surveys, only 4% of Americans hold to a biblical worldview. Basically, do you see the world through a biblical lens? Do you believe in the fundamental elements of a biblical reality? And only 4% of Americans do so. You know, it's no wonder that we're facing the troubles we are and the challenges that we are today, because we really have, as a nation, largely forsaken God's word as the measure of truth in our world and in our society. Well, folks, we are commanded by Christ to make disciples of all nations. We have to rebuild this biblical worldview and understanding of the Bible in our culture and in our society today. So get a copy of your free booklet today, and I encourage you to purchase the 4-volume series, Biblical Worldview by Andrew Wommack, produced under the leadership of Alex McFarland. It's an incredible study and will really help you, your family, your Sunday school group, and any other small group study you want to do it with to grow in a biblical worldview. So I encourage you to do that. As I mentioned, our guest today is John Guandolo, and I'm going to introduce him properly here in just a second. But John is an expert on terrorism and communist subversion in America. And, it's been 24 years since 9/11, when Islamic radicals used airplanes as bombs and flew them into the World Trade Center in New York City, into the Pentagon in Washington, D.C. They were going to destroy the United States Capitol, but the brave Americans on board forced that plane to crash in a field in Pennsylvania. And it's been 24 years since that day, and it's been 34 years since the fall of Soviet communism in Russia. And yet today, Islamic terrorism and communism remain the two primary threats to freedom in the world and two of the primary sources of violence and killing in the world. On January 16th, just a few days ago, Israel announced it had entered into a ceasefire with Hamas after 15 months of war in the tiny little nation of Israel. A war that was brought on by Islamic jihadi hatred and zeal against the Jewish people. When Muslim Palestinian terrorists invaded Israel on October the 7th of 2023 and killed over 1,200 civilians, captured nearly 300 innocent civilians, and held them hostage inside Gaza. Many of them died, many of them were tortured, sexually abused, starved to death, and other unspeakable things. On New Year's Day here in America, an ISIS devotee, former American soldier, ran a truck into the crowds in the French Quarter in New Orleans and pulled out a rifle, an automatic rifle, and began firing, killing 14 before he was taken out by police. During the Biden administration, we essentially had an open southern border, allowing 11 to 13 million illegal immigrants enter our nation and remain here with no repercussions whatsoever, and among them tens of thousands coming from countries that sponsor or promote Islamic terrorism. In his first term in office, Donald Trump basically ended ISIS, that murderous Islamic caliphate started in Syria and Iraq, and he tightened our southern border. It remains to be seen how he handles the issue of Islamic terrorism in his second term and how he handles the issue of communist infiltration in America. The People's Republic of China has grown massively in the last 20 years. They now have the largest navy, the second largest economy, a massive number of nuclear missiles and weapons, a huge army. They almost are at a point where they can act militarily with no repercussions whatsoever from the United States or its allies because they've grown too big. During the Biden administration, everyone remembers when they flew a spy balloon from coast to coast across America, intentionally flying it over American military installations. And the feckless Joe Biden did nothing. They have open spy networks in the United States, police stations in America. Military-aged men have crossed over Chinese men have crossed over our southern border in America over the last few years, and the number of them that now are operating in the United States is unknown, and nothing has been done about it. And I want to share to you today, folks, that the communist threat to America is by no means gone. In fact, I think it is worse today than it has almost ever been. The influence of the Chinese Communist Party is felt worldwide. China has made an open play to subvert the United States and destroy it, forming an alliance with other nations of the world to create to replace the United States dollar as the world's reserve currency. Openly seizing the territory in Afghanistan that we relinquished, full of American weapons, and many other things they've done to attack and undermine the United States. But the thing that is the most disturbing to me, besides their military buildup, is how the Chinese communists, and in league with Islamic radicals, have infiltrated American culture and society, influencing our universities and our schools at every level. Here in the state of Colorado 2 years ago, at a meeting of the State Education Association, which is basically the teachers' union, a resolution was introduced and passed calling for the abolition of capitalism in America, the abolition of free enterprise, replacing it with Marxist socialism. This is a teachers' union in America. We have people who believe across this nation that free enterprise is an evil system, who believe that America is an evil nation, a systemically racist nation, founded by evil men and women. The 1619 Project, endorsed by the New York Times, written and created by Marxists, with one purpose in mind: to undermine the historical and moral foundations of this country. Did you know that the promotion of homosexuality and pornography and sexual promiscuity in America was one of the platform items of the Communist Party in this country, published as a matter of open record in the Congressional Record in the 1960s? Documented in a book called The Naked Communist. Folks, we need to wake up as Americans, especially as Christians and as conservatives. We need to wake up that these threats are not fairy tales, they are real. And we need to recognize the fact that we are in a war. We are in an active conflict with people with nearly unlimited sources of money who seek to destroy the United States of America because the foundations of this nation are philosophically, diametrically opposed to what they believe in. We are diametrically opposed in America. Let me say this. The Declaration of Independence, it says that all men are created equal and endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, among which are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. We believe in one nation under God. We believe in the Bible as the foundation for truth and the source of natural law, which is the ultimate authority in our country. This is what America is. Well, it is 100% at odds with Islam, the religion of Islam, which is not just a religion, as you'll hear on today's show. It's a way of life. Islamic law seeks to control in totalitarian fashion every aspect of human life. Islam itself, the word Islam means submission. The religion of Islam was spread throughout Asia, North Africa, and even Southern Europe over a period of 1,000 years through force, violence, and conquest. Islamic terrorism is not a new concept. It's been around for over 1,500 years. And yet we still want to pretend that Islam is a religion on equal par with other faiths in the world. We refuse to see it for what it is, as a political ideology that is a direct threat to freedom and democracy around the world. Communism, though Soviet communism failed, communism is still very much alive and well in the nation of Russia and many of its former satellite nations. And it still is the governing philosophy and doctrine of China, the largest nation in the world, and our direct enemy in so many ways. And China is playing a long game, guys. We think just because we've elected a new president, then suddenly the threat from communist China is going to go away. Nothing could be further from the truth. Here's the thing, in the 1990s, our Congress voted to give China most favored nation status. When they did that, they opened the floodgates for American businesses and industry to invest in China. We began sending our manufacturing to China, right? Communist China. We thought, we deceived ourselves. I remember the debate in Congress. We deceived ourselves saying, oh, yeah, if we could just open them up to free enterprise, they'll see how great it is and they'll cast aside communism. How ridiculous. What we've done is, with our own industry and our own system, we have funded the construction of the largest military in the world and of our mortal enemy that could absolutely destroy us with its nuclear weapons. They're poised to invade Taiwan, and I wonder if the United States is even going to be able to do anything about it. Folks, we have to wake up to the reality that communist China and their infiltration in the United States is a direct threat to our national security and even to the very survival of this nation. We have just emerged from, I'm going to say 16 years, because I take it back to the Barack Obama administration forward, of a leftist progressive insurgency in the United States that designed, in Barack Obama's words, to fundamentally transform the United States. A man who thought that the United States Constitution was nothing more than an interesting historical document, and they worked through conspiratorial means to undermine just about every American institution. We are emerging from that, and COVID and all that it was, and the World Economic Forum conspiracy, with a new and a fresh day. The inauguration of Donald Trump was like a sunrise over America. We have a lot of hope. There are going to be some incredible and great accomplishments. But if you do not recognize who your enemy is and what they're about and what their strategies and tactics are, you cannot defeat them. And we yet in this country have not fully recognized. It's incredible, but we still have not fully recognized the threat of Islamic jihad, its level and depth of penetration into our nation and at the highest levels, and the direct threat of Chinese communism and its infiltration into every sphere of our culture and society. We've got to realize this, we've got to take it seriously, and we've got to treat it for what it is, an enemy, and we have to get it out of our culture and out of our society. So I'm very excited to have as our special guest today, John Guandolo. John is he is a graduate of the United States Naval Academy, served as an officer in the U.S. Marine Corps. He had combat operations in infantry and reconnaissance. He then went to work after a discharge from the military for the FBI for 13 years in its counterterrorism program. And he identified significant jihadi networks in the United States and briefed hundreds and hundreds of federal officials and military officers at the highest levels of our nation. He was the first individual, along with Stephen Coughlin, working with the Joint Chiefs of Staff to brief them about Islamic Jihad, the threat of it inside the government. He, after leaving the FBI, John has been active at the private level, educating and training average and everyday Americans and law enforcement officers to recognize the threat and take precautions and do everything we can as Americans to root this threat out of our country. He's an instructor at the Practical Government School here at Charis Bible College and has become a good friend. And so I'm very excited to have him on our show today. Before we go to John, let me just take a couple of seconds to remind you about our free gift today, which is What is a Biblical Worldview, a booklet by Andrew Womack, which you can get by going to our website at truthandlibertygtn.com. Do that today, and I'll be back in just a few seconds with our special guest today, John Guandolo. You won't want to miss this interview, so don't go away. Are you passionate about standing for truth in the culture, but don't know how to get started? Well, Truth and Liberty, our mission is to educate, unify, and mobilize the body of Christ to stand for truth in the public square. And as part of our mission, we provide you with an amazing array of resources on our website. And our website has just been revamped, remodeled, and retooled to be user-friendly. And I'm so excited about it because I believe that there's nothing like it out there anywhere. I want to encourage you today to go to truthandliberty.net and check out the Resources Center and the Get Equipped Center. On our Resources Center, you will find hundreds of links, hundreds of videos, articles, blogs, even America's original founding documents can be found on Truth and Liberty's Resources Center. It's searchable by topic, preset topic, or you can put in a custom search to find exactly what you need and what you're interested in. In the Get Equipped section, we link you to tools created by our strategic partners, including Pray, Vote, and Engage tools. We culture impact teams, civic action teams, biblical citizenship in modern America, biblical worldview training, and more. So go today to truthandliberty.net and find what you need to get equipped to stand for truth in the public square. All right, folks, we're back here on Truth and Liberty with my good friend and our special guest, John Guandolo. John leads an organization called ASIG2, and his website's asig2.com. John, it is awesome to have you on the program today.
Thanks. It's great to be back with you again, Richard.
So what do you do through asig2.com? Can you elaborate on that for us?
Yeah, so it's the mission is the same thing I've been doing for years, which is, and we have focused certainly for the last 8 years or so on the local community. I still do obviously briefings and consulting with businesses at the national level and sometimes with foreign entities or governments, but primarily it's going into local communities at the county level and training citizens, local county officials, and local law enforcement on how to identify and flush out organizations and leaders of the Islamic movement, the communist movement, and people collaborating with them, and how to build a plan to actually retake and fortify the county and reestablish the founding principles in a Republican form of government. And I'll just say very briefly, the reason that has been my focus is after the 24 years or so that I've been doing this work, I've found that this is the only way, based on the nature of the war and the nature of the corruption in the federal government, that this war can actually be won.
So you actually travel around the country and meet with local law enforcement officials and community leaders to train them on how to identify terror cells, terror operatives in the local community, and to root that stuff out at a local level.
That's right. And it's the techniques that we teach, everything is lawful, but it's important to remember that a huge percentage, I would argue 85 to 90% of what these movements are doing are in the non-kinetic or non-violent realm. You know, they go in, it's counterintelligence, it's espionage, it's subverting the education, the religious community, the political community, the media, the security apparatus, meaning state government, state security services or police, local police. And so we're teaching them how to recognize them, how to identify them, and the techniques we've found that are very effective at flushing them out. But it's not just that, it's coming up with a comprehensive plan. So by the time we leave and are done training this group of people in this, anywhere USA, some county, it's providing them the tools and energizing them to actually, put freedom on the offensive and take the fight to the bad guys.
Well, I want to come back to your organization later in the program, but let's talk a little bit more about this threat of Islamic jihad, terrorism, and then later communism here in America, John. So you served in the, first off, you were a Marine Corps officer, but you also served in the FBI for many years in counterterrorism and then in the Defense Department. Through those years of experience, were you surprised personally at the depth of infiltration, penetration in America by Islamic jihadis?
Yes. It is worse today, but it was pretty bad in the 1990s, and it's just getting worse as the years roll by. So yes, number one, I was shocked when I was in the FBI and started looking at this stuff. And this came to me by working cases after 9/11 and coming to realize that the very leaders of organizations that the FBI, CIA, State Department, Treasury, White House, National Security staffs, and others were relying upon to advise them in an official capacity on how to deal with the quote-unquote terrorist threat were themselves jihadis. They were, I call them suit-wearing jihadis. So, we can go back to the Clinton administration, the guy who was the, quote, Islamic advisor to President Clinton. Now, why a U.S. president needs an Islamic advisor, we can talk about that later. But, Abdurrahman al-Amoudi was the largest financier for al-Qaeda in North America. And so it brings up a whole lot of issues. Number one, maybe that's not a good idea. Maybe the Secret Service and FBI vetting procedures are completely broken. And maybe the reason that Mr. Clinton had a number of opportunities to kill Osama bin Laden during his administration, he never did because the guy advising him was an al-Qaeda guy. I mean, that's a reasonable question, I think, for people to ask. Maybe is that the reason why Mr. Clinton was so broken in his response to a lot of these, different issues, including, by the way, the Battle of Mogadishu in Somalia and how he responded to that. So you can move forward during the Bush administration. On 9/11, a guy named Suhail Khan is working in the White House, whose father was one of the most prolific Muslim Brotherhood leaders in North America. Through the Bush administration, Mr. Bush goes to the Islamic Center of, Washington, D.C., which is a Saudi Arabian mosque, and gives this speech just a few days after 9/11. And over his left shoulder is the leader of Hamas, Nihat Awad, and over his right shoulder is a guy named Khalid Safori, who's the deputy to the al-Qaeda guy under the Clinton administration, Abdurrahman al-Amoudi. This is right after 9/11. So at some point, you got to scratch your head and say, how bad is it? Well, that was the 1990s and 2001, and I'm not a mathematician, but it's 2025, so I think it's almost 25 years later, and here, or 24 years later, here we are, and it's much worse. You got Maher Bitar right now, well, as of a day ago, was the director of intelligence for the National Security Council, as a Hamas guy under Mr. Biden. So how bad is it? It's horrible, but I would tell you that wasn't the worst of it in my experience. The worst of it was the number of people I briefed at very senior levels in the U.S. government is staggering. Well over 100 members of Congress, including the House and the Senate, chairman of Homeland Security, Intelligence Committees in the House and Senate, Judiciary Committee in the House, former FBI, CIA, DIA directors, former national security advisors and U.S. attorney generals, many 3- and 4-star generals and admirals. And what was more shocking than the level of penetration by the bad guys was the complete and utter ignorance of our leaders not only to the penetration, but of actually who the enemy is, why they're doing what they're doing, and the what it will take to actually stop them based on their own doctrine. And so, to me, that was those two things have been and continue to be the things that really shock me with regard to where we are as a country.
Well, I remember so clearly, John, after 9/11, when President Bush repeatedly would refer to Islam as a religion of peace. And it seems like that the leaders still try to do this, where they call the Islamic terrorists, they treat them as if they're some kind of a fringe element. But you've studied Islam in depth, studied their history, studied their doctrine, and their operations. Are jihadis, as we call them, are they fringe elements, or are they more centrist if you look at Islam as a whole?
That is a great question. Let me answer it first, kind of quickly this way, and then we'll delve into it. You cannot articulate something that Al-Qaeda teaches its fighters, and they have formal classes, by the way, even when they're out on the battlefield, when they're not fighting. Same thing with the Islamic State, formerly ISIS, same thing with Hezbollah, same with Hamas. What they teach, you can find those same teachings in authoritatively published books of Islamic law, and you will not find the soft, gushy, warm and fuzzy version that our leaders keep talking about. That's never been taught anywhere in the Islamic world. And I want to make this point for your viewers as clear as I can. You cannot, I'll ask it as a question. Name one national Islamic organization in the United States, true for Europe and Canada as well, but let's just, in the United States, one national Islamic organization that's not hostile. Name it. Name one prominent Islamic leader in North America that's not hostile. You can't. And therein lies the problem, is everywhere we turn. I've put together this chart of all these faces of all these people that have worked inside the government, advised and all this, and then underneath it, just who they're affiliated with: Al-Qaeda, Hamas, ISIS, Muslim Brotherhood, Iran, Hezbollah, whoever. So when you see a Muslim in a prominent position in the government, 100% of the time they're hostile. 100% of the time. And that goes even back before 9/11. But they will sell it to us. They sold al-Moody to us. Washington Post called him the pillar of the Muslim community in Washington, D.C. They told us that, just pick one.
Why do we have such a problem? Well, John, why do we have such a problem in America and in the West in general at calling Islam for what it is? I mean, why do we shy away from recognizing that it's not a normal religion interested in peace, that its doctrine requires it to be spread through force and violence? Why can't we face that fact?
So that's a great question. And the way you phrased it, let me just say, if you open the most widely used textbook in U.S. Islamic schools to teach Muslim children about Islam, it's a book by a guy named Yahya Emmerich, who's a Muslim brother, by the way. And it's called What Islam's All About. You open up the very first page, the third paragraph, after a couple little sentences of introduction, it says this, and I quote, "Islam is not a religion, however, but a complete way of life." And then it goes on, and end quote, and then it goes on to explain that complete way of life is a totalitarian system, a government, a state, an Islamic state governed by Sharia that comes from the Quran and the example of the Prophet Muhammad, and that, quote, "the duty of the Muslim citizen is to be loyal to the Islamic State." Now, why don't our leaders know this? Well, I have, in my experience of talking with hundreds and hundreds of senior leaders at the state and federal level in the United States, and that includes pastors, that includes national security people, that includes people in the media, that includes, you have a variety of reasons. many of them, and I would say, like for instance, in the media, it's because they're either stupid or nefarious. Those have been my two examples. But some of them are also cowardly. In the government positions, it's they're cowards mostly. Then there are those people. Well, some of them, many of them, are also wildly arrogant. So I've always said one of the most dangerous combinations is arrogance and ignorance. But there are some who are intentionally nefarious, like the former Congressman Keith Ellison, who's the Attorney General of Minnesota, is a Hamas operative. John Brennan, who was the CT advisor of the president and the CIA director, he's intentionally nefarious. He is a jihadi. These people are batting on the jihadi team. You have the number 2 guy at the FBI, Paul Abate, who is aiding and abetting terrorists, Al-Qaeda. So you've got those people who are bad people, and these people need to be tried and put in jail. So there's a whole variety of reasons why they do what they do, but I'll give you a very current example. When Jeff Landry was the Attorney General, he's now the governor, when he was the Attorney General of Louisiana, I briefed him and laid out the network nationally and the network in his state. And his response was, well, I'm not going to do anything because if I did, my political career would be over. Well, that's an admission to my face that your oath of office doesn't mean jack to you. And that means you're criminally negligent for the dead people in your state who just got killed by a jihadi on New Year's Day. And so I know the reputation of Jeff Landry is he's a conservative Republican, which he is, but he has grossly failed the people of Louisiana because he put his own interests ahead of doing his duty, legal duty, I might add, under the Constitution.
Well, now,
I will make even the bigger point, Richard, is I believe the vast majority of leaders, even the ones who call themselves Christians in the United States, do not operate under the founding principles, which, as identified in the Declaration of Independence, that our law and government rests on the law of nature, and law of nature is God, that was legally defined at the time of the founding in Blackstone's commentaries as the will of God as he reveals himself through his creation and Holy Scripture. And if we decide that that's too uncomfortable for us, which I believe even under this administration it's too uncomfortable to get back to, then we're not going to win, number one, this war. And number two, I'm not sure it's worth fighting for if what we're fighting for is some lukewarm, squishy, amorphous America that doesn't actually stand on a bedrock of the founding principles.
Well, John, I appreciate the straight talk. I totally do. And I appreciate your comments there. I think that the law of nature and nature's God is something that God is bringing us back to. We're not there yet. It won't get there in one administration. It could take several, or even, half a dozen, maybe half a century. But great things are happening. But with respect to Landry, do you have any knowledge or reason to think that was he on notice of the particular threat posed by the gentleman who committed the terrorist attack on New Year's Day? What should he have done given the knowledge that he had or that he had access to?
So in each state, and I'll put the governor of Texas, since I live in Texas, in the same category, because this jihadi came from the Houston area, where it's just a massive amount of easily identifiable jihadi organizations. It's a massive network in the state of Texas. But it's the same in Louisiana. So if you, again, going back to what I said about the training that I do, if you take away their support structure, so right there in, within 10 miles of city center, New Orleans, I think when I wrote the article, I said within either 5 or 9 miles of the attack site. I think it was 5 miles of the attack site. There are like 9 jihadi organizations, and those are left in place. Now, we don't know, even the FBI has said they don't know the jihadi in this attack who ended up getting killed by the police. We don't know what support he got there in Louisiana, if any, but we know he traveled overseas to Egypt. There's a number of reasons he would have done that, then traveled to Canada. And so to an area that's probably likely, I mean, it is a jihadi hotbed. So it would make sense that he went there either to get the final legal checkoff from the Islamic scholar. But so who is that? But these are questions the FBI won't ask. Because their average agent hasn't been trained in any of this.
So here's what I looked up that I could easily learn about this guy is that we all know he had an ISIS flag in his truck. His name was Shamsuddin Bahar Jabbar. Even authorities acknowledged from the beginning that he was inspired by ISIS. And, he had a lot of ammunition on him, explosives in his truck, and also planted around the French Quarter. But how did he get that way? I haven't heard anything about that. How did he become a Muslim, and how did he get radicalized? He's a 14-year veteran of the United States Army, a lifelong U.S. citizen. So is our law enforcement just going to treat this, this was just some lone Muslim who decided he was going to go shoot up New Year's Day in New Orleans, and turn a blind eye to trying to find the connection points?
Yes. Yeah, that's what we've done for 20 years since 9/11, 20 plus years. That's what we've done. They're all lone wolves, which is, by the way, a term that doesn't exist in Islamic law. This is in Islamic law, what Jabbar did, that is individual jihad. The law of jihad specifically allows for Muslims who are called into the jihad, who hear the call as an individual and decide to act, then it's lawful. And it is standard practice that they go to their own Islamic scholar or one in the area or one they know to say, this is what I'm doing. Is this lawful? Am I doing the right thing? Yes. And so we can point from including 9/11 to Boston, to the Fort Hood, to this guy in Louisiana, and all these jihadi attacks over the years, hundreds of them, by the way, and we can tie them to a known organization and or a known Islamic scholar in the community. And there it is. I mean, I had briefed in Arizona for a number of years and taught law enforcement about the Islamic Community Center of Phoenix. Is a Muslim Brotherhood mosque. It's a Hamas mosque. Here's what they teach. Here are the leaders. Here's why they're hostile. Never was there an independent investigation opened on them. And then 2 jihadis from the mosque several years ago came to Garland, Texas, had a free speech event and tried to kill people. And thank goodness we had a good cop here who put them both down like they should be put down. What did the mosque do? The mosque said, that guy, the one guy that you're trying to pin on us, we don't know him. He didn't come here. And then, of course, at the time he's saying that, the imam, the leader of the mosque, there's a video on the mosque website of the guy teaching classes. So and you can do this with almost every event. And the FBI and the state police and local police are catastrophically clueless.
Are we so afraid as a nation? Are we so afraid of being labeled as haters, labeled as biased, or whatever you want to call it, that we won't even look at the facts that are obviously staring us in the face?
Yes. And I would argue part of the big reason, and part of the reason I emphasized the lack of understanding by our leaders of the founding principles, is because if you look specifically at the communist movement, their ultimate, if you put, creating a communist state in America as almost just behind the leading edge, and the leading edge of that movement is to destroy critical thought. And I would argue critical thinking in the United States has been decimated, where you have people that can say a man is a woman, a woman is a man, or a woman is a thing, that I can marry an inanimate object, that 2 + 3 is 7, because I say it is. When you get to a point in this, if that's the kind of stuff you fall for, it's like the old saying, you can fall for anything. And that's where we are. And we have men and women in positions of authority who have been rendered witless and unable to critically think and therefore actually discern facts, evidence, truth, etc.
Well, there's so much to say and ask still about this problem of Islamic jihad. One of the most disturbing things that I heard in the last couple of years, though, was the number of men who have crossed the southern border illegally, John, under the Biden administration, that hail from countries that foster, protect, and promote Islamic terrorism. How many, just say this, potential jihadis do you think have entered America illegally in the last 4 years?
I would argue tens of thousands at least.
Mm-hmm.
And the problem is we don't have the number. We have a lot of data, and we know from some of the people that have been stopped during different months, kind of the areas of the world they're coming from. We do know that. We see some of that. But I want to also remind your audience that back after 9/11, maybe 2 years, 3 years after 9/11, FBI Director Mueller testified that these jihadis coming from places like Yemen, Syria, and elsewhere were coming through Central and South America. They were wearing clothing that made them look like they were from Central South America, and they learned enough Spanish so they would just say Spanish words and they would be treated as someone from some Central or South American country, when in fact they were not. They were jihadis trying to get into the country. So the level of deception is pretty high there, and I think it's worth noting that. The last point to be made is that, I heard Mr. Trump say several months ago that, all these people coming across the border, they're building an army. I would amend that slightly. They have an army. They're reinforcing their army. You have thousands of organizations, jihadi Islamic organizations in the United States that is the support network for terrorists. And like I said, pick an event from 9/11 forward, and we can point to, 9/11, the Islamic Center of San Diego, or the Dar al-Hijra Islamic Center that helped 9/11 hijackers, or, when the jihadi killed 5 Marines and a Navy sailor, or 4 Marines and a Navy sailor in Chattanooga. The Islamic Society of Chattanooga, that's a Muslim Brotherhood of Hamas entity. The Boston Marathon Bombers, the Islamic Society of Boston, Muslim Brotherhood Hamas entity. So we know this network. And instead of smashing, annihilating was the word Mr. Trump used today, which I would like to apply it to this movement. These entities have to be annihilated. The leaders have to be imprisoned, deported, or executed for, in some cases, espionage, treason, all this stuff, if they've served in the government. But whatever has to be done has to be done. And my concern is I don't see any recognition by the people who are going to be handling this that they even know this.
Well, John, we're getting down to the second half of our show here with you, and I want to talk about the communist threat. I know I probably, to many people, sound like I just stepped out of the 1950s, but it's actually more real now probably than it even was back then. But John, I want to ask you first, before we go to that subject, if people want to learn more about these threats in our country and stuff like that, do you have a website or resources that they can get a hold of?
Yes, so johnguandolo.com is the site that I use to teach, to make all these resources available. I have books for sale. I just literally 2 days ago published 3 videos on my shop. You can purchase them on Sharia, because everything the Islamic movement does, whether it's Al-Qaeda or the suit-wearing jihadis working in Washington, D.C. or up on Capitol Hill, Sharia is not only the blueprint of how they fight the war, it's what they seek to impose. And if you don't know it, you cannot understand this war. JohnGuandolo.com.
There is so much more. I got to have you back soon because there's so much more to talk about on this subject, like, what the United Kingdom is going through right now as they are realizing that they have lost control of their country to Muslims, and they don't know how to reel this thing back in. But let's shift gears now, John, to communism. We used to think that the main threat of world communism was Russia. Russia falls, so okay, everybody, Cold War is over, let's celebrate, and now we're the lone superpower in the world. We don't have to worry about it anymore. But what is the reality with respect to communist subversion in America today?
Well, it's significant, and let's start with some of the most obvious examples. Antifa is modeled off. Antifa formed in the early 1930s in Germany on the orders from Comintern, the International Communist Party in the Soviet Union at the time. And the Antifa here in America flies the exact same flag, and they have the exact same objective. If you go to look at Black Lives Matter, this is not a civil rights organization that went awry. This was an organization that was created and controlled by Communist China. It was created by the largest Communist Chinese front groups in America, Liberation Road, Freedom Road socialist organizations, that works directly with the Chinese Progressive Association, Asians for Black Lives, and they all work with the Chinese consulates in the United States with Chinese Communist Party officials. So I want to make clear for your viewers, as we just moved out of that discussion about the Islamic movement, both the Islamic movement and the communist movement have published doctrines and strategies. They have hundreds of lines of operation, thousands of front organizations in the United States, and are primarily controlled by hostile foreign powers. Let me say this one more time. What has been transpiring in America is the intentional outcome of a 100-plus year communist movement in America, a 60-plus year Islamic movement in America. They are working seamlessly at the ground level in Anywhere USA. And these are not homegrown organizations. These are organizations that were created and are controlled by hostile foreign powers, some of which are hostile nuclear powers. Examples, China, Pakistan.
And can you comment, John, on how much influence does the Chinese Communist Party, how much influence do they leverage right now today in America? I know they've been buying up land. They have Chinese police stations in cities across America, but they also have spies all over the place. I remember a news article about Congressman Stilwell was dating an actual Chinese Communist Party spy. We had the scandal of university professors across America being on the payroll of the Chinese Communist Party as spies and stuff. How much influence do they have? How far along is the Chinese effort to subvert the United States?
I'd say, you just gave some great examples, very far along, and about as penetrated as we could be in the academic, the political realm, again, in the religious, especially Christian and Jewish, but primarily Christian communities, in the media. Both the Soviets and the Chinese have significant influence. And by the way, they owned Mr. Biden. Mm-hmm. I mean, let's just, now that the facts have been on the table now for, 18 months, we know taking millions of dollars from communist Chinese officials, him and his son, his whole family. I mean, all of them should be in jail. And I think Mr. Biden and Ms. Harris and Mr. Obama and Ms. Clinton and John Brennan could all be charged with treason, John Podesta. So we'll see how serious Mr. Trump is. But staying on the point here, the entire movement that they have here has penetrated the highest levels of government and academic institutions, the business community. How many hundreds of millions of dollars did American businesses, the biggest businesses, Disney, Nike, give to the Chinese Communist Party through Black Lives Matter? It's astounding. And if Mr. Trump wants to get to the bottom of it, start investigating Nike and Disney and all these other companies that knowingly gave money to a communist front. And of course, they're going to claim, well, we didn't know that. Well, if you were going to buy a company, don't you do due diligence? And since it's all unclassified, publicly known that BLM was created out of a communist front group, that means you're incoherent, unprofessional, but we're going to hold you criminally liable for this. We're going to bring criminal charges on you. Boy, you'd see that money for the commies evaporate quickly. But this is, so the number of organizations, Democratic Socialists of America, Communist Party USA, the Green Party, Code Pink, RevCom. I mean, my God, they've got more communist organizations. I have a published list of it. It's hundreds and hundreds, and I can't keep up because they're creating new ones every month. So the network is wide. The penetration in our system is deep. And again, this is the challenge for Mr. Trump. Is if we want to win the war, you got to actually put your finger on the bad guys and vanquish the enemy. That's how wars are won. Changing policies isn't going to win wars. It's going to help. It's going to help set the stage for a more successful battle. But at some point, you actually got to identify the enemies and vanquish them.
Well, John, there were surveys, I think it was last year, maybe year before, that I saw that a majority of millennials and younger in America believe that socialism is preferable to free enterprise, or as they call it, capitalism. Anymore, just a footnote, I don't use the word capitalism, I use free enterprise because capitalism was Marx's term, so I want to play on my turf, not his, but they think socialism is better. This is a result of indoctrination in our public schools, in our universities, and in our media. Am I right on that?
Absolutely, 100%. I think if American citizens want to do something, pull your children out of public schools and stay home and homeschool them. Don't send them to school at all, but whatever you do, get them out of public schools. Those should dry up.
Well, how did the communists get that much influence in our education system?
They had a plan for how they were going to do it in Europe, how they're going to do it in America, how they're going to do it in Australia, how they're going to do it in Canada, and they enacted that plan. And it's a long-term plan that began, I mean, you could go back to the 30s was the first time a U.S. textbook, started to get modified about our founding and our foundations, 1934 or 5. And then you can look at times throughout history, why do you think we had Bibles in school from the early 1600s to 1965? And why were they removed in 1965? Who was behind that? Well, the communist movement was. All of these things happen. And every time they happen, just like we were told, hey, don't ask, don't tell, instead of you can't. Now it's just don't ask. Every time there was a little, just a nudge in the wrong direction, we were always told it's no big deal. But it's the incremental destruction. And now here we are, where we're on the brink of losing our entire republic.
Well, okay, let's ask we'll try to wrap things up with a few incendiary questions, okay? So first, the first one is the drones, man. The drones, it was funny, drones. Everybody's worried about the drones, seeing drones at night over all these major American cities, and the government's lying to us about this. We know that, but no one really ever got any answers about where they really came from. And all of a sudden, we have these massive fires break out in Los Angeles, and now no one's talking about drones anymore. What do you know about those drones, John, and where did they come from? What is the truth about that situation?
Well, we don't actually know. We don't have a good handle. What I would say is anytime I evaluate, when we look at these threats, I always map what I'm seeing with the facts on the ground and an understanding of the modus operandi of the communist movement, the jihadi movement. So we know the Chinese have purchased land almost always adjacent to some important critical infrastructure group, just like the Islamic movement builds mosques adjacent to critical infrastructure almost all the time. Could be a National Guard armory, could be a power plant, water plant, you name it. But that's how they do it. And there's a reason for that. So the idea that they could be launching these drones, the Chinese I'm talking about right now, and using them, whether it's Iran or what, who knows? The problem is we don't know. And all of our officials that I saw on TV were like, I've been told it's nothing. Well, you've been wrong since 9/11 on these matters, and you've minimized the threat, and we, the people, keep getting hammered. So I do not trust the state and federal governments on these matters to protect me and my family, because they've demonstrated they don't know what they're doing.
For a while, we were hearing, when it first started, we were hearing that, there was some shipment of nuclear material that entered the port, I can't remember where, somewhere on the East Coast, and the container's damaged and we don't know where the material is, and so we're searching for it. Was that I don't suppose there's any truth to that, but what do you think of that explanation?
Well, I think the idea that could be true is realistic, but that doesn't explain drones in other parts of the country.
Yeah, right.
Right? If there's an issue at a port in New Jersey, why are there drones in California? Why are there drones in other parts of the country that are not explained? And so, all of these things. You brought up the fires, so let me just say in maybe 10 or 15 seconds, we know that the Islamic movement, and this is not the first time they've set fires. Jihadis have been caught. I've spoken with detectives and police in several states in the last 15 years where they've caught guys in places like Arizona and New Mexico and elsewhere where these kinds of things, where jihadis were in a camp, discovered. So this would not surprise me if these were, because there were multiple flashpoints, if this was intentional. Based on the scope of this, highly likely. Highly likely.
Have you heard the talk about what happened in Maui and the fires there, and the comparisons between that and Los Angeles? Do you see any potential similarities? Do we have reason to believe there could be some bigger conspiracy?
Well, I think the truth of the matter is both states are run by communists. Gavin Newsom and the leadership of Maui at the time. These are, at a minimum, I would call them hard left political, but if you look at what their belief structure is, this is communism. These are communists. Now, I think Gavin Newsom's a card-carrying communist, but just like Joe Biden, Kamala Harris, because we can track their political careers to real communists who brought them up in the Democrat Party.
Well, John, we're out of time for today. We could take a whole lot more, so we're going to have to have you back on, but I want to thank you for coming on the show today, and give us your websites. There's johnguandolo.com, right? And then
johnguandolo.com, which is really the resources, and a lot of resources, a lot of free resources, plus the books and the videos and stuff, and then asig2 if you want to get the training.
All right. Thank you so much. I appreciate that. And again, thank you for coming on the show. It's good to see you, and we'll look forward to having you back on.
Thank you. Great to be with you again, Richard.
Thanks, John. Folks, I want to remind you about our free giveaway today. It's What is a Biblical Worldview? A booklet by Andrew Wommack that's taken out of the Foundation series, Foundational Truth volume number 1 of the Biblical Worldview series, which you can acquire on the Truth and Liberty website at truthandliberty.net. If you want to get a copy of this free booklet, just go to truthandlibertygtn.com and you can get yours for free today. We hope you'll take advantage of this free offer. Thank you to all of you for watching our show today, for tuning in, and it's been a really educational experience. I hope you'll tune in again next time here on Truth and Liberty. God bless you all. Thank you so much for watching.